Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, Trends in Network Modernization and Security, sponsored by Juniper Networks on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Dave Mihalchik, the Chief Technology Officer for the Defense Information Systems Agency, Armando Gavino, the Executive Director of the Office of Network Services within the Office of Integrated Technology Services in GSA's Federal Acquisition Service, Sean McIntyre, a Solutions Architect in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration in the Department of Commerce, and Tim Solms, the Vice President of Federal for Juniper Networks. So we ended last segment on a very interesting note, kind of talking a little bit about overcapacity and the challenge of right now when agencies need to do something very quickly. They have to plan for overcapacity versus spinning it up, as Sean talked about. If there's a big storm on the East Coast and you know more people are going to come to your website. I know it's a simplistic example, but I wanted to turn to Mondo real quick because GSA also is talking to customers. Are you hearing from your customers that they're tired of planning for overcapacity and want to move to something that they could turn up, turn down, meet their needs in a more agile way?
Yes, they are actually. There's this group that GSA is leading. It's called the Infrastructure Advisor Group, IAG. It's comprised of different agencies. DISA is very active with that one, and DoD as well. They meet on a quarterly basis, and the way I'm going to answer your question is basically the type of commonality that we get on a regular basis is the ability to transform from old to new. Transformation is a big deal. And how are they going to transform? Going through IP. And how are they going to do that? Well, the plan is basically we're trying to capture the requirements as much as early as we can. And we have this thing called the Agency Transition Plan, ATP, that we have been briefing the CIOs. My boss, basically Mayor Davey, has been going around and meeting with the CIOs and myself and asking for their ATP that's going to be due. Basically recommend that that they be turned into us by October timeframe of this year. That's the perfect opportunity, the perfect location to actually specify the overcapacity requirements in the form of an SDN. We truly believe that SDN is part of the solution, but it's not the only solution. Again, there's other avenues, but it's the most promising avenue right now that's been tested in industry. And by the way, I truly believe that partnership with industry is very, very critical. That's why we have engaged heavily with industry when we set out the RFP for our EIS. We made three major industry engagements, 40+ one-on-one engagement with industry, trying to get the RFP right. We got it out on time, and I believe it was a successful RFP release. So we're very proud of that.
All right, I know bids are in, so we're limited to what we can talk about, or yes, proposals are in, I should say. But I want to go back to the Infrastructure Advisory Group real quick. So that's a meeting where agencies and GSA are really discussing what's the future network look like. Right. Do I have that correct?
That is correct. And the way we do this is basically that's a good topic of discussion. And the way what we are doing now is basically we're asking agencies. For example, a particular agency, they send out their RFI almost a year in advance, and we made them basically the talking lead and talk to the group about lessons learned. How did you do it? What did you do differently? That's very proactive. So future IAG meetings will primarily be consisting of success stories, lessons learned from agencies on how did you what's your plan in transforming early. We want to learn as much as possible. We want to capture it, and we would like to promulgate that from within the government agency. We also work with ACT-IAC, as you know. Basically, we're trying to put forward the same process, not just basically in the government, but also work with our industry. As I said before, working with industry is key to success in transitioning on time. Look, basically, I have to transition. The last time we transitioned took 6.5 years. I've got to be able to transition in 3 years, double the business volume, much more complicated with IPs, with the same amount of resources. That's going to be very hard, and I'm looking for ideas to mitigate that. And one way to mitigate that is talking with industry, and we're doing that quite a bit.
Tim, let me turn to you real quick because I just want to follow up on something that Armando said regarding the planning for EIS, and I don't want to go down necessarily down that path, but just generally speaking, are you seeing customers who are getting this agility, this overcapacity issue, and they're tired of saying, we have 40 servers that we only use 10 of them, and we have these other 30 for the just in case. Are you starting to see that from your clients too?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the federal government has appropriately focused on warfighting for well over a decade, and as we're shifting into that transformation piece that we're talking about, where it has to be quick, it can't take 16 years to happen again, simultaneously that fiscal boot happens to be on everybody's neck. So what we're looking at now is how are we finding those efficiencies? And I can tell you that the shift that I've seen across the federal government in the last, I'd say, 2 years is that spent a lot of time in the past meeting with contracting officers and attorneys, and we're now seeing the mission owners and the IT leaders step back into the conversation where they're willing and looking to engage with industry to say, hey, look, we're going to have to step outside of our comfort zone. You all have been doing this. Other industries, financial industry, other parts of what I would call the regulated industries have already been through this. How can we take those lessons learned, find those efficiencies, while understanding and appreciating the security that's unique to the federal government?
David, it's an interesting segue that Tim brings up, the mission owners meeting more to understand. Part of the reason is the budget challenges, but I think also part of the reason is this realization of the cybersecurity challenges and threats that agencies are facing. When you look at the software-defined networking and moving the transformation of the network, where are the cybersecurity benefits? What are some of the big things you guys are looking at from a DoD perspective?
So multiple benefits, starting off with speed and agility. When we detect a threat, when we detect an issue in the network, we can rapidly reconfigure the underlying fabric, whether that be the data center network, whether that be the virtual machines running inside of a virtualized compute stack or a commercial cloud stack. So we can make changes on the fly. We can remediate with patches. We're demonstrating all of this in a project inside the DISA CTO today called Software-Defined Everything, where, among other things, when a network threat is detected, we can auto-remediate the software running in real time, fall back to a known good state, or be able to move running workloads from one physical or virtual location to another. So huge benefits there. In addition, something called network function virtualization, where in the future, instead of having edge routers or switches at every customer location, we may have a stack of compute resources, and we can push software to that stack of compute resources. And that software could be security software to do real-time threat prevention and detection, to do antivirus, to give them additional compute resources. Basically, anything we do in the physical world today, we're going to be able to do in a virtual world in the future with network function virtualization.
I just want to touch base on that project in the CTO's office. How far down the path are you? Can you tell us just a little bit more?
So software-defined everything. My guys actually call it software-defined enterprise. I keep telling them to change it, but they won't. So maybe after this interview, they'll actually listen to me. Anyway, software-defined everything. What we're trying to do is look across the technologies of cloud computing, SDN, and also orchestration and automation to be able to cause everything to happen essentially on demand. That includes being able to configure the network, configure the compute stack, configure operating systems and applications, load them, and start them. And then when threats or problems are detected, auto-remediate those. We've been working on this for several months now. We have a laboratory demonstration of most of the capabilities that I've talked about, and we've actually demonstrated it with DCS, Defense Collaboration Services, which is a DISA open source based development that's deployed on the NIPRNet and CIPRNet that allows DoD users to collaborate globally. So we've taken a copy of that, and about 80% of the functionality in that we've built into SDE, and we can essentially turn it up on demand, auto scale, add additional servers as capacity is required, and once again, when problems or threats are detected, auto remediate those by pushing patches to the system in near real time.
I think it's a very fascinating project. Obviously, we'll follow up with you later on that. Let me turn to Sean. What you just heard from Dave, from a cyber perspective, you guys at NOAA have maybe a different cyber challenge. I mean, you still face the same threats and same vulnerabilities, but you want to push some data out,
Right,
but you also
right.
need to make sure that data is not messed with, because,
Well,
Go ahead, take
and
it.
we don't want to burn our tick stacks down. If you point a 40 gig fire hose at those tick stacks, they might just melt down. And if that happens, then do we fail open or do we fail close? And if we fail open, there's implications associated with that. And if we fail close, then we're not meeting our mission. So we're looking at ways that maybe SDN will give us an opportunity to take some of those big fat flows and vet them, make sure that they're legitimate, and then shunt them around our tick stack, or at least certain layers in the tick stack. Other ways that we might be able to leverage SDN applications or enabled applications are the Einstein 3A requirements. Rather than making every DNS administrator figure out how to get their stuff pointed to that magic recursive server in the sky, we can intercept it along the way and rewrite and take care of that without them even knowing it's happening.
when you say tick stack, just it's a trusted internet connection.
Yes.
It's the gateway that agencies should have in place that
Exactly.
traffic. Okay.
Yes.
I want to make sure, because sometimes we all can get lost in the acronyms, especially those DoD people. Tim, let me turn to you real quick about this cybersecurity issue. We heard two kind of interesting, relatively straightforward ideas of the benefits of cybersecurity and two different missions. I mean, NOAA's, again, facing out, DoD is really internal. Give me a sense from your perspective, from your clients, what are they hoping to gain from a cybersecurity perspective?
So as we're looking to advance the network, definitely looking to protect the network. And regardless of what we're doing across the federal government and regardless of the mission, those requirements are not remarkably different. I mean, you look in categories of, hey, we're looking in the intelligence community, or we're looking in defense, or we're looking in the civilian agencies. There is a common thread there. What we're trying to do from an industry perspective is to say, okay, we can take what known threats look like. We can take those from commercial enterprises, commercial networks, and be able to take, from a software perspective, that knowledge and bring it into even a potentially closed network. So we can look and say, okay, we now have the ability to have, early identification to when a threat is starting to position itself, and be able to give tipping and keys to that, so that we can either react to it or choose not to react to it to gain more information while protecting that core data. So that's definitely an evolution that we're seeing through there. And one of the things, as we look to collaborate more and more with the federal government, we can bring some of that knowledge, from other verticals or other enterprises into the federal government. When I look at federal, as an enterprise, we also have verticals within the vertical. There is there's definitely a finance, there's definitely healthcare, there's education, there's even smart cities and cyber inside the federal government vertical. So how can we take the expertise or the lessons learned associated with those type of verticals in the commercial space and bring some of that knowledge inside a federal network?
Dave.
So one topic we really haven't touched upon that I'd like to make sure we hit is the convergence of mobility in SDN. So the challenge today is we have mobile devices within the DoD and mobile users, but they sort of a priori have to be connected to a network that gets them to where they want to go. Either a guest network to get them to the internet, or a private DoD network through something like Wi-Fi, secure Wi-Fi within a building. And moving forward, what we'd really like to see are users inside DoD post camps and stations or in the commercial world, and based on their identity, based on them asserting their identity when they try to access the network, reconfigure the network using SDN, route them to the place they need to get to, whether if they're a guest user to the internet, if they're a DoD user, their appropriate post-camp and station network, and then be able to interact with our mobile device management, so we can do things like, if a device hasn't been properly patched, we can shunt it off to a network where all it can do is download patches. And so SDN is really going to give us capabilities we don't have today, and move that ball very far forward.
And to be clear, Dave, this is all going to happen automatically. The idea is, if I come to the DISA to hang out with you, and I want to log on to the guest Wi-Fi, that SDN would automatically say Jason Miller should not have any access to anything except for the public internet, so to
Right,
speak.
absolutely. So based on a user identification and authentication, knowing who you are, what your role is, whether or not your device is configured in a secure fashion, connect you to what you should be connected to and only what you should be connected to. And moving forward, that may cross security boundaries. You may have heard about something called commercial solutions for classified. In the Pentagon already, there are users doing secure Wi-Fi, basically having secret machines. They're using a highly encrypted Wi-Fi network that is deployed within the Pentagon. So moving forward, what I'd like to see is convergence, so we could use those Wi-Fi networks to handle unclassified as well as classified users and be able to use identification and authentication as well as key management to keep those separated.
Interesting. Armando, let me just turn to you real quick about this mobile piece. So as you guys are working on the next generation telecom contract, mobile is playing a huge role, I know. Where does SDN, mobility, as Dave kind of described, how does that all come together within the contract?
That's an excellent question. It's a nice segue to this group that basically we were asked to participate in. As you may or may not already know, Mary Davey is the designated government IT category executive. And part of the ask that's been levied on the group, there's this group called the Mobile Service Category Team. And the primary reason for the existence of this group is to define the mobile policy for the United States. We have many members over there, and DoD is well represented, Navy is there. There's actually one avenue that we can collaborate in and inject SDN into the discussion. There's still time. I think, but that's a perfect opportunity to collaborate. Let me go back. Go ahead.
No, go, please.
Security. I just want to add, basically, when we developed the RFP for EIS, we collaborated very, very heavily with DHS. We partnered with them, and I believe we've captured the essence of the majority of the security requirements of the agency, as well as DHS, which is the security lead for the nation. I believe we have that in our RFP.
And I know between TIC and DDoS security, the idea of domain name security and all the other initiatives of Einstein that have been going on,
right.
I know it's all, you can see through the RFP that's all been filled in.
I believe the proposals or the items that we have in our RFP basically will enable Einstein 3 and Einstein 3A in the future.
Excellent. Well, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to jump into a workforce discussion. You're listening to the panel discussion, Trends in Network Modernization, sponsored by Juniper Networks, on federalnewsradio.com and 1500 AM.